They're always so loud. That's the first thought that shot through her mind, a nasty little spark of prejudice she'd never admit to anyone. She saw the young black man in seat 2A, dressed in what she considered overpriced streetwear, speaking animatedly on his phone. She saw a target, not a passenger, a nuisance to be managed. She had no idea she wasn't looking at some random guy trying to show off. She was looking at the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, a man who held more power in his little finger than she'd see in 1,000 lifetimes. She decided to teach him a lesson about respect, but in the next 60 seconds, she would learn a lesson of her own. Some people don't just complain to the manager. They buy the whole damn system just to shut it down. The air in the first-class cabin of Transatlantic Airways, Flight 815 from New York to London, was a carefully curated illusion of tranquility. The scent was a bespoke blend of lavender and chamomile. The lighting was a soft, simulated twilight, and the champagne was a vintage brut that cost more per bottle than a coach ticket. For the flight attendants working this section, the job was less about service and more about performance art. They were expected to be invisible, yet omniscient, anticipating the needs of clientele who could with a single angry email end a career. Karen Miller, a senior flight attendant with 15 years of service, understood this better than anyone. She also resented it more than anyone. 15 years of smiling at arrogant tech bros, coddling the wives of hedge fund managers, and cleaning up after their spoiled children had curdled her once genuine smile into a brittle professional mask. At 42, with a mortgage that felt like a lead weight and 2 kids in college, she was tired. The glamour had long since faded, replaced by the gnawing anxiety of keeping her job in an industry that prized youth and pliability. Her gaze fell on seat 2A, Marcus Thorne. He was young, maybe 25. He was handsome with a sharp, intelligent face and a physique that spoke of disciplined training, not just a gym membership. He was also black. And in Karen's weary, prejudiced mind, these facts coalesced into a familiar, irritating stereotype. He wore a deceptively simple gray hoodie that she knew from a glance was from a designer like Loro Piana, costing thousands. On his wrist was an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, its octagonal bezel catching the cabin light. To Karen, this wasn't a sign of success. It was a costume. He was playing a part she thought a rapper or an athlete who'd stumbled into money and was now determined to make everyone aware of it. The source of her immediate irritation was his phone call. He was speaking Japanese, his voice a low-focused murmur. The call had started before the cabin door was closed and had continued through the safety briefing, which he'd ignored. Now, as the plane was taxiing toward the runway, he was still talking. It was a violation of federal regulations, a clear-cut rule she was empowered to enforce. This, for Karen, was a gift. It was a chance to exert the small measure of authority she possessed. She glided down the aisle, her movements practiced and smooth. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Sir, you need to end your call now. All electronic devices must be in airplane mode for takeoff." Marcus held up a single finger, a universal sign for one moment, without looking up. He said a few more words in Japanese phrases that sounded like "confirmation on the acquisition" and "alert the Tokyo office," then ended the call. He looked up at her, his eyes calm and unreadable. "My apologies," he said, his voice a deep, cultured baritone that didn't match the stereotype in her head at all. "It's handled." He slipped the phone into his pocket. The politeness somehow angered her more than defiance would have. It felt condescending. "The rules are for everyone, sir," she said, her voice losing its sweet edge. "Not just the people in the back of the plane." A flicker of something annoyance, maybe just weariness, crossed his face. "I am aware. It was an urgent business matter. It is concluded. Thank you." He turned his attention to the window, a clear dismissal. But Karen wasn't done. She felt the eyes of the other first-class passengers on them, the CEO of a German car company in 1B, the British actress in 3C. She felt a flush of self-righteousness. She was the authority figure here. She represented the airline, the FAA, the rules that kept them all safe. "It doesn't matter how urgent it is," she pressed on, her voice rising slightly. "We are on an active taxiway. Your business could have waited 5 minutes. It's a matter of respect for the crew and the other passengers." Marcus turned back to her slowly. His calm was unnerving. "With all due respect," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You made your point, I complied, and the issue is resolved. Continuing to lecture me is no longer about safety, is it? It's about something else. He had her. He had seen right through the professional veneer to the petty power trip beneath, and his calm exposure of it was humiliating. The blood rushed to her face. In that moment, all her frustrations, the mortgage, the condescending passengers, the fading youth, the 15 years of forced smiles found a single convenient target in the face of this young, wealthy black man who she felt was looking down on him. You people are all the same, she hissed, the words slipping out before she could stop them, a venomous whisper that was louder than a shout in the quiet cabin. So arrogant. You think your money buys you the right to do whatever you want. Marcus's face went rigid. The calm vanished, replaced by a glacial cold. What did you just say? You heard me, Karen snapped, emboldened by her own audacity. I'd like your name, he said, his voice flat and hard. And your employee number. A part of her brain, the professional part, screamed at her to stop, to apologize, to de-escalate. But the angry, resentful part had taken the wheel. You want my name? You can file a complaint. They'll throw it in the trash with all the others from people like you trying to get a free flight voucher. I don't want a voucher, Marcus said, his eyes locking onto hers. I want your name. It's Karen Miller. She spat, her pride overriding all common sense. And I'm not afraid of you. And then, in a moment of catastrophic miscalculation, she did it. It wasn't a punch, but a sharp, stinging slap across his face. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent cabin. The German CEO flinched. The actress gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Marcus Thorne didn't even blink. He simply sat there, the red mark of her hand blooming on his cheek. He slowly raised his hand, not to retaliate, but to pull his phone back out of his pocket. His fingers moved with an eerie calm, tapping the screen. He made one call. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He put the phone to his ear and spoke 3 sentences, his voice as clear and cold as a winter morning. Rebecca, it's Marcus. There's been an incident on transatlantic flight 815. I need you to contact David. He hung up. He looked at Karen, his eyes holding no anger, only a terrifying, profound finality. It was the look of a judge who had just passed sentence. Karen Miller felt the first icy tendril of fear. She didn't know who Rebecca was. She had no idea who David was. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew she hadn't just slapped a passenger. She had slapped the wrong one. She had just set fire to her own life. And the system wasn't just going to shut down for her, it was going to grind her into dust. David Lowell, chief legal officer for Thorne Dynamics, was in a meeting discussing the final details of a multi-billion-dollar green energy acquisition in Scandinavia when his private line buzzed. Only a handful of people had that number, and only one of them, Rebecca Finch Caspian Thorne's formidable chief of staff, would ever use it during market hours for anything less than a corporate catastrophe. He excused himself, stepping into the soundproofed glass corridor overlooking the Manhattan skyline. David, he answered. Rebecca's voice was clipped all business. David, I just had a call from Marcus. He's on TA 815 JFK to Heathrow, currently on the taxiway. He said there was an incident. A flight attendant assaulted him. David felt the temperature in the corridor drop. Assaulted. Not argued with, not insulted. Assaulted. Define assaulted. He didn't elaborate. He just said he needed me to contact you. His tone, it was the one he uses when someone has crossed a line Caspian himself has drawn. I've already pulled the passenger manifest. The flight attendant is Karen Miller, employee number 743B. 15 years with Transatlantic. Marcus is in seat 2A. David's legal mind was already moving at lightning speed, processing variables, calculating leverage points, and mapping out a strategy. This wasn't a simple customer service complaint. This was an attack on the son of Caspian Thorne. Caspian Thorne didn't just run a global conglomerate. He was a force of nature who had built an empire from nothing, battling prejudice and institutional barriers at every step. He was fiercely protective of his family, particularly his son, whom he was grooming to take over. An attack on Marcus was an attack on the Thorne legacy itself. Does Caspian know? David asked. Not yet. Marcus called me first. That was deliberate. He wants the pieces in place before the bomb goes off. You know how he operates, strategy before emotion. All right. David said, his voice now firm and commanding. Here's the protocol. First, get me the CEO of Transatlantic Airways on the line. Not his assistant, not his deputy. Jonathan Creed. Tell his office it's a code black matter concerning Thorne Dynamics. They'll know what that means. We have a $60 million annual corporate travel account with them. That's our primary leverage point. Already on it, Rebecca replied. Second, David continued, I want our aviation legal team to draft a preservation of evidence notice. It needs to be sent to Transatlantic's general counsel within the hour. Demand they preserve all CCTV footage from the gate and jet bridge the cockpit voice recorder data for the relevant time frame, all internal communications regarding Flight 815, and the full employment and disciplinary file for Karen Miller. Emphasize that any deletion of this data will be treated as spoliation of evidence and met with maximum legal penalty. Drafting now. Third, find out who was sitting near Marcus. Seats 1B, 1A, 3C, 3A. Get their names. We need witnesses. Rebecca, I need you to be discreet. Use our internal intelligence assets. We need to know who these people are before we approach them. Understood. Finally, David said, taking a deep breath, tell Caspian, but tell him after I've spoken to Creed. Tell him the system is in motion and that we have control of the narrative. He hung up and walked back toward his office, his mind a whirlwind of clauses and consequences. The Scandinavian deal was forgotten. A new, more important file had just been opened, one that carried the full, terrifying weight of the Thorne name. Meanwhile, on Flight 815, the atmosphere had frozen. Karen Miller stood numbly in the aisle. The co-pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a delay due to unforeseen ground logistics. The other flight attendants in first class avoided Karen's eyes, moving about their duties with a frantic, nervous energy. They had all heard the slap. They had all seen the look on Marcus Thorne's face. Karen retreated to the galley, her heart hammering against her ribs. Fear was quickly being replaced by a desperate defensive anger. He provoked me, she told herself. He was arrogant, dismissive. He broke the rules. She began constructing the narrative in her head, the one she would tell her husband, her union rep, her manager. The story where she was the victim, the hard-working professional, pushed to the brink by a privileged brat. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Susan, followed her in her face pale. Karen, what did you do? She whispered. I did my job, Karen snapped. He refused to comply with safety regulations. You slapped him, Susan hissed. In front of a full first-class cabin, do you know who that is? Some rich kid with a chip on his shoulder? Karen retorted, though the words sounded hollow, even to her. That rich kid is Marcus Thorne. Susan said, her voice trembling slightly. His father is Caspian Thorne. The name didn't register immediately. It sounded vaguely familiar, like a name you'd read in the Wall Street Journal. Susan saw the blank look on her face. Caspian Thorne. Thorne Dynamics. They're one of the biggest corporate accounts we have. Maybe the biggest. They spend tens of millions with us every year. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath Karen's feet. The abstract fear now had a name and a number attached to it. $60 million. That was the number David Lowell had quoted. The weight of that number felt like it was physically crushing her. A gate agent suddenly appeared at the galley door, his face grim. Karen Miller, he asked, not meeting her eye. The captain wants to see you. Now. He paused. And bring your things. You won't be flying today. As Karen walked the length of the plane to the cockpit, it felt like the longest walk of her life. She passed Marcus Thorne's seat. He was now looking at a tablet, seemingly engrossed in a spreadsheet. He didn't look up. It was as if she no longer existed. That more than anything terrified her. It wasn't anger she saw, but irrelevance. Back in New York, the call between David Lowell and Jonathan Creed, CEO of Transatlantic Airways, was brief and brutal. Creed, a man accustomed to command, found himself on the defensive from the first second. Jonathan, it's David Lowell. David began dispensing with pleasantries. I'm calling about an incident on your Flight 815. It involves Marcus Thorne. Creed's stomach tightened. A call from Thorne's top lawyer was never good news. David, I'm just hearing about a delay on the ground. What's happened? One of your employees, Karen Miller, physically assaulted Mr. Thorne in the first-class cabin. An unprovoked assault witnessed by multiple passengers? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Assaulted, are you certain? Completely. David said coldly. Now, Jonathan, we can handle this in one of two ways. The first way is that I file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against your airline for battery negligence in hiring and supervision and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The press will have a field day with the story, Transatlantic Flight Attendant Attacks Black Passenger in Racially Motivated Incident. I will subpoena your executives, your training manuals, and the employment records of every flight attendant you've hired in the last 5 years. I will make your company the poster child for corporate malfeasance and systemic racism. Your stock will tank and that $60 million account you have with us will vanish, as will the accounts of every business associate Caspian Thorne has, which as you know is a significant portion of the Fortune 500. Creed felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. And the second way, he asked, his voice strained. The second way, David said, is that you take immediate, decisive, and transparent action. Ms. Miller is to be terminated for cause effective immediately. I want a written confirmation of her termination on my desk before her flight would have landed in London. You will issue a formal public apology to Mr. Thorne. You will cooperate fully with our internal investigation and provide all the evidence I demanded from your general counsel. In return, Mr. Thorne may consider not pursuing personal litigation, and Thorne Dynamics may consider not immediately severing our business relationship. The choice is yours, Jonathan. You have about 5 minutes to make it. The message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. The system wasn't just being leveraged. It was being commandeered. For Karen Miller, the slow grinding gears of corporate self-preservation had just begun to turn, and she was standing right in their path. The termination email arrived while Karen was in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at JFK being questioned by an airport-based regional manager and a stone-faced woman from corporate HR who had been dispatched with alarming speed. Karen was halfway through her carefully constructed narrative, the one where Marcus was the belligerent aggressor and she was the stalwart defender of federal aviation law, when the regional manager's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his eyes widened, and he slid the phone across the table to the HR woman. She read the message and her already severe expression hardened into something resembling granite. Ms. Miller, the HR woman said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I think we have everything we need. She slid the phone back. Transatlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for physical altercations initiated by our staff. Regardless of any perceived provocation, your employment is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. The words hung in the airless room. Terminated? Karen stammered. You can't. I have a union. There's a process. You haven't even heard my side of the story. We have the preliminary report from the captain and the lead flight attendant. The manager said, his tone now icy. More importantly, we have a formal complaint from the injured party. The decision has been made at the highest executive level. It is final. An escort will see you to the employee exit. Your final effects will be mailed to you. It was a corporate execution, swift and merciless. Her 15 years of service, her loyalty, her performance reviews, all of it had been vaporized in an instant. The system she had dedicated her life to had turned on her and ejected her without a second thought to protect itself from a greater threat. She was escorted out of the airport like a common criminal, her ID badge confiscated, her access codes revoked. The humiliation was a physical ache. When she got to her car in the employee lot, she finally broke down, sobbing with a mixture of rage, fear, and disbelief. This isn't fair, she thought. Because of him, that arrogant bastard. Her husband Dave was a building contractor, a stoic man who believed in hard work and paying your dues. When Karen got home and told him her version of the story, leaving out the racial slur and framing the slap as a panicked, defensive gesture, he was predictably outraged. They fired you just like that for doing your job, he fumed. We'll fight this. We'll get the union lawyers. We'll sue them for wrongful termination. Karen clung to his anger like a life raft. Yes, that's what they'd do. They would fight. They'd expose the airline for kowtowing to some rich bully. Her victim narrative solidified, becoming her reality. But the machine set in motion by Marcus Thorne's call was far from finished. It wasn't just about getting her fired. That was merely the opening move. David Lowell's team worked with surgical precision. Within hours, they had identified the passenger in seat 1B, a Mr. Wei Chen, a senior partner at a Singapore-based private equity firm. A quiet, observant man in his late 60s. An associate from Thorne Dynamics' Singapore office who happened to have a pre-existing professional relationship with Chen's firm placed a polite, informal call. Mr. Chen, a man who valued decorum and hated public scenes, was more than willing to provide a statement. His account was devastating to Karen's case. He described Marcus Thorne as perfectly calm and compliant. He detailed how Karen Miller had been unnecessarily aggressive and belligerent. He quoted her exact words, including the venomous, "You people are all the same." And he described the slap as a shocking and unprovoked act of violence. He agreed to sign an affidavit to that effect. The statement from the actress in 3C, a rising starlet who was terrified of bad press, was less detailed but corroborated the core facts. The narrative was now cemented not by the word of a rich kid, but by independent, high-credibility witnesses. The next blow was financial. As promised, David Lowell faxed a formal notice to Jonathan Creed's office. It wasn't a lawsuit, but a notification that Thorne Dynamics was initiating an audit of their contract with Transatlantic, citing a breach of the service and safety agreement clause. It was a clear signal that the $60 million account was on life support. But Caspian Thorne decided that wasn't enough. He made 2 phone calls himself. The first was to the CEO of Aero Leasing International, the company that leased nearly a third of Transatlantic's long-haul fleet. The second was to the chairman of the investment bank that held a significant portion of the airline's debt. He didn't make threats. He just expressed his profound disappointment in Transatlantic's corporate culture and safety standards and mentioned that Thorne Dynamics was reevaluating its strategic partnerships across the entire travel and logistics sector. The message was subtle but unmistakable. The ripples spread instantly. An airline's reputation is its most valuable asset, and the quiet disapproval of a man like Caspian Thorne was like a virus in the financial markets. Whispers started on trading floors. An influential analyst at a major bank, catching wind of the Thorne situation, downgraded Transatlantic's stock from buy to hold, citing potential C-suite instability and contract risks. The stock, already fragile from rising fuel costs, wobbled. It dropped 4% by the end of the day. By the morning after the news of the downgrade hit the pre-market wires, it was down another 7%. On paper, Transatlantic Airways had lost nearly $500 million in market capitalization, all because of one slap. For Karen and Dave, the world was shrinking. The union rep, after hearing the airline's evidence, including Mr. Chen's witness statement, called Karen back. His tone had shifted from combative to funereal. "Karen," he said gravely, "this is bad. They have a signed affidavit from another first-class passenger. He's quoting you verbatim about what you said before you hit him. He's lying. It's a misunderstanding." Karen insisted, her voice shrill with panic. "They also have the lead flight attendant's statement confirming she heard it." "Karen, a physical altercation is one thing. We can sometimes fight that. But documented racially charged language? There's no defense for that. The airline will paint you as a racist and a liability. If we take this to arbitration, we will lose, and it will get very public. The best I can do is try to negotiate the terms of your termination to voluntary resignation, so it doesn't look so bad on your record." The offer was a gut punch. "Resign, admit guilt." "No, I'm not resigning. I didn't do anything wrong," she yelled, slamming the phone down. The consequences began to bleed into their personal life. Karen tried applying to other major airlines. Her applications were met with silence or polite, instantaneous rejections. She was blacklisted. The term gross misconduct was a scarlet letter in the tight-knit aviation community. No one would touch her. The loss of her income was immediate and catastrophic. Her salary had been the stable foundation of their finances. Dave's contracting work was feast or famine. The college tuition payments were due. The mortgage on their oversized suburban house suddenly looked less like an investment and more like a ticking time bomb. The argument started, Dave seeing the union backing away and the reality of their financial situation setting in, began to doubt her story. "Karen, you have to be honest with me," he said one night, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Did you really say what they claim you said?" "They're twisting my words. Why are you taking his side?" she screamed. "I'm on the side of not losing our house," he yelled back. "You picked a fight with a guy who can crush us without even thinking about it. What in God's name were you thinking? The foundation of their marriage, already strained by years of financial pressure, began to crack. Karen's self-righteous anger was her only defense against the crushing weight of her mistake, but it was isolating her, turning her into a stranger in her own home. She had wanted to teach a lesson about respect, but the universe was now giving her a brutal, comprehensive education on the true nature of power and consequence. The system wasn't just shutting down, it was methodically, impersonally, and completely unraveling her life thread by thread. A week after the incident, the story, which had been a tightly controlled corporate crisis, exploded into the public domain. It wasn't a leak from the Thorne camp. They operated with more finesse. It came from a disgruntled transatlantic employee, a mid-level manager in the PR department, who was furious about the stock drop affecting his pension plan. He anonymously tipped off a reporter at Bloomberg, framing the story for maximum impact. Billionaire's son assaulted on TA flight airline in chaos as powerful father seeks revenge. The article was a bombshell. It named Karen Miller. It detailed the stock plunge. It quoted anonymous sources within the airline describing the code black call and the panic in the executive suite. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just an unemployed flight attendant. She was a national news story, a villain in a drama of class, race, and power. Her photo, a cheerful one from her now-deleted Facebook page, was everywhere. The narrative was set: a bitter racist Karen had attacked a young black man, and his powerful father was exacting a terrible and swift revenge. The public reaction was a firestorm. On social media, she was vilified, doxxed, and threatened. But a counter-narrative also emerged. Pundits and online commentators began to frame it as a story of corporate bullying. A working-class woman, a mother of two, was being destroyed by an untouchable billionaire family. Is this justice, or is it a rich man's vendetta? One popular talk show host asked. This new narrative twist was exactly what Jonathan Creed, the CEO of Transatlantic, had been waiting for. He saw an opportunity to salvage his airline's reputation by shifting the blame. He authorized his PR team to leak a new piece of information, a subtle but brilliant piece of misdirection. They began to reluctantly confirm to select journalists that the Thorne family had rejected a very generous private settlement offer, including a substantial donation to a charity of their choice and a personal apology. The implication was clear: the Thornes weren't interested in making things right. They were interested in punishment. This was the first twist of the knife designed to paint Marcus and his father as vindictive. The truth was more complex. David Lowell had indeed been approached with a settlement offer. It included a 7-figure payment and a binding non-disclosure agreement. Marcus had rejected it instantly. In the gleaming minimalist boardroom of Thorne Dynamics overlooking Central Park, Marcus faced his father. Caspian Thorne, a man whose presence filled any room, listened intently. He was immaculately dressed in a bespoke suit, but his eyes held the unyielding hardness of a man who had fought for everything he had. "They want to buy our silence, Dad," Marcus said, pacing the floor. "They want to write a check, sign an NDA, and pretend this is about money. It's not. It was never about money. It was about the look in her eyes, the assumption, the you people." "I know," Caspian said, his voice a low rumble. "I've seen that look 1,000 times. In boardrooms, at banks, from policemen. It's the tax we pay for our success, for our existence. And I'm tired of paying it," Marcus shot back. "If I accept their money, I validate their thinking. I let them believe that my dignity has a price tag. That woman, Karen Miller, she's just a symptom. The disease is the corporate culture that protects and enables people like her until they cross the wrong person. What about the people who don't have David Lowell on speed dial? Who do they call?" This was the heart of the matter. Marcus wasn't seeking revenge against Karen Miller. He was seeking accountability from Transatlantic Airways. He instructed David Lowell to send back a counteroffer, one they knew the airline would never accept. He didn't ask for money. He demanded 3 things. 1, a public prime-time apology from CEO Jonathan Creed, not just to Marcus, but for the airline's systemic failures in training and diversity. 2, the implementation of a mandatory company-wide de-escalation and implicit bias training program designed and audited by an independent firm of the Thornes' choosing. 3, the establishment of a multi-million-dollar independently administered fund to compensate any passenger or employee who had filed a substantiated claim of racial or gender discrimination against the airline in the past 5 years. It was a masterstroke. It was an offer the airline couldn't accept without admitting massive institutional guilt, but couldn't refuse without looking like they were trying to cover it up. It shifted the narrative from a personal vendetta to a fight for systemic change. But then came the second deeper twist, the one no one saw coming. A young, hungry investigative journalist named Chloe Martinez, not content with the mainstream narrative, started digging into Karen Miller's life. She wasn't looking to absolve her, but to understand her. Why would a 15-year veteran snap so spectacularly? Chloe uncovered something buried deep in Transatlantic's HR archives, something a standard background check would miss. 5 years earlier, Karen Miller's co-pilot and close friend, a man named Frank, had suffered a massive mental health breakdown mid-flight, an event the airline had successfully and quietly covered up. He had been dangerously overworked, flying multiple back-to-back international routes. Karen had been the one to notice his erratic behavior and had filed a confidential report with HR warning them that he was a danger to himself and the crew. Her report was ignored. 3 weeks later, Frank was found dead by suicide. Karen had been devastated and furious. She filed a formal grievance alleging that the airline's negligence and brutal scheduling had led to her friend's death. She fought them for months, but the airline's legal team buried her in paperwork, threatened her with a lawsuit for breaking confidentiality, and eventually promoted her to senior flight attendant with a classic corporate tactic of promote and silence. Chloe Martinez published her story. It didn't excuse Karen's actions, but it provided a tragic, damning context. Karen Miller was not just a perpetrator. She was also a victim of the same cold, inhuman corporate system she had attacked Marcus Thorne in the name of. She was a woman broken by a system that demanded perfection while breeding resentment, a system that had ignored her when she tried to save a friend's life, then empowered her with petty authority over its passengers. Her bitterness wasn't born in a vacuum. It was cultivated in the toxic soil of corporate indifference. The story went viral. Now the public saw not just a villain but a tragic figure, a woman whose own trauma and powerlessness had been misdirected in an ugly, racist outburst. The clean lines of the drama, good versus evil, victim versus villain, were now irrevocably blurred. For Marcus, this revelation was profoundly unsettling. His fight was with the airline, with the system. But the face of that system, Karen Miller, was now revealed to be one of its casualties. Crushing her no longer felt like justice. It felt like participating in the same cycle of destruction that had broken her in the first place. The knife had been twisted, and it was now cutting both ways, revealing a far more complicated and painful truth than a simple story of a slap and its consequences. The revelation of Karen Miller's past, meticulously unearthed and broadcast by the investigative journalist Chloe Martinez, did not just change the chessboard, it flipped the entire table. The story of her ignored warnings about a suicidal co-pilot and the airline's subsequent calculated act of promoting and silencing her became a powerful counter-narrative that resonated deeply with a public wary of corporate malfeasance. This new tragic context gave Transatlantic a perverse and unexpected form of ammunition. Their PR team, masters of narrative warfare, pivoted with breathtaking cynicism. They began to leak carefully worded statements to sympathetic journalists, framing Karen Miller as a deeply troubled employee. Her reprehensible actions, they suggested, were not a reflection of the airline's culture, but the unfortunate and unforeseeable result of her personal trauma, a trauma for which the airline, their lawyers quickly added, bore no legal or financial responsibility. They were attempting to use the very tragedy they had created as a shield against accountability. For Caspian Thorne, this maneuver was the ultimate act of corporate depravity. Seated in his sprawling office, a glass-walled sanctuary, high above the ceaseless energy of Manhattan, he saw the move for what it was: a grotesque deflection. It was one thing to defend the company against an attack. It was another entirely to exhume the ghost of a dead pilot and weaponize the trauma of a broken employee to evade responsibility. He had witnessed this exact brand of cold-blooded calculus in boardrooms and back-alley deals for 40 years. It enraged him with a searing primal fury. "They're parasites," he said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that seemed to shake the very air in the room. He slammed a hand down on his polished obsidian desk, the sound echoing the finality of a gavel. "They cultivate a garden of poison, then feign shock when one of its flowers turns toxic. They created the monster and now they want to cry victim because it finally bit someone. We are not letting them get away with this. We will burn them to the ground. Marcus, however, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking not at his father, but at the city below. He had been profoundly disturbed and moved by Chloe Martinez's story. The image of Karen Miller in his mind was no longer a simple caricature of a bitter, racist flight attendant who had assaulted him. That woman still existed, and he did not absolve her. But her image was now irrevocably intertwined with that of a whistleblower, a grieving friend, and a woman who had been systematically chewed up and spat out by the same soulless corporate machine she had so fiercely and wrongly tried to defend. His quest for systemic justice, once a clear and righteous path, now felt muddy and hollow if its primary casualty was yet another victim of that same corrupt system. Revenge, he was beginning to understand, was a simple brutalist structure. Justice, however, was a complex and sprawling cathedral full of shadowed alcoves and moral compromises. Dad, Marcus said, his voice cutting through his father's tirade with a calm that belied the storm of thoughts within him. Stop for a moment. What is the actual goal here? Is it truly to burn Transatlantic to the ground, or is it to actually make things right for what their culture produced, for what she did to you, and for the gall of what they're doing now? They absolutely deserve to burn. Caspian retorted, his fury unabated. And what happens the day after we light the match? Marcus countered, turning to face him. His expression was not one of defiance, but of earnest, challenging inquiry. Their stock collapses completely. They file for Chapter 11. 30,000 employees, pilots, mechanics, baggage handlers, cleaners, gate agents. They all lose their jobs, their pensions, their health care. The executives who made these decisions, they walk away with multi-million-dollar golden parachutes. The company's assets, the planes and the routes, get bought for pennies on the dollar by some vulture capital fund that will squeeze them even harder. The system we hate doesn't die. It doesn't even change. It just gets a new, more ruthless owner. In that scenario, we haven't punished the guilty. We've punished thousands of innocent people. We become the very thing we despise, an unaccountable, destructive force ruining people's lives because we can. Caspian fell silent, the rage in his eyes slowly receding, replaced by a look of intense scrutiny. He studied his son, seeing not the wounded young man from the airplane, but the cool, strategic mind of a true leader. He saw his own legendary ambition and ruthlessness, but it was tempered with a deep well of compassion that he himself had often been forced to suppress during his long, brutal climb to the top. He saw the future of his legacy, and it was more nuanced and more powerful than he had envisioned. What do you propose? Marcus Caspian asked, his tone shifting from warlord to collaborator. A slow, determined smile touched Marcus's lips. We don't destroy them from the outside, he said. We don't burn the house down. We buy the house and we remodel it from the inside out. We change the game entirely. The final move was executed with a breathtaking combination of speed, stealth, and audacity that would be studied in business schools for years. Thorn Dynamics, operating through a labyrinth of subsidiary investment arms and third-party brokers to mask its activity, began a massive coordinated campaign of quietly buying up Transatlantic Airways' deeply depressed stock. With the share price hovering near an all-time low and market sentiment at rock bottom, it was the fire sale of the century. Simultaneously, David Lowell leveraged the relationships Caspian had primed weeks earlier. He approached the investment bank, holding a significant portion of Transatlantic's corporate debt, and purchased it outright. This dual-pronged attack gave them power as both owner and creditor. Within 10 business days, before any market analyst or financial reporter could piece together the pattern, Thorn Dynamics had completed its mission. They had become the single largest shareholder in Transatlantic Airways. While they didn't possess a majority controlling interest, their block of shares, combined with their new status as a primary debt holder, gave them enough power to force an emergency shareholder meeting, demand board seats, and effectively command the fealty of the board. The official announcement filed with the SEC sent a seismic shockwave through the financial world. Jonathan Creed, the embattled CEO of Transatlantic, was utterly blindsided. He was summoned not to a hostile negotiation with an angry client, but to the Transatlantic corporate boardroom for a meeting with his new and most powerful boss. Creed walked into the room, a man visibly aged by a month of crisis, to find Marcus Thorne and David Lowell waiting for him. Caspian Thorne was deliberately not present. This was Marcus's victory to claim. Mr. Creed Marcus began, his voice devoid of triumph, instead imbued with a calm, surgical precision. As of this morning, my family's firm is your largest investor. We believe in the long-term potential of this airline as a brand and an asset. However, we have zero confidence in its current leadership and its demonstrably toxic corporate culture. As such, you have two options before you. Option A, you and your entire executive board tender your resignations effective immediately. In return, you will receive your standard non-accelerated severance packages as stipulated in your contracts, and we will not pursue any further legal action against you or your board members personally for gross mismanagement and dereliction of duty. Option B, you refuse. In that case, we will initiate a hostile takeover, which we will win. We will then gut this company from the top down, and David here will personally lead a litigation effort that will ensure you and your colleagues never work in this industry or any other again. Jonathan Creed, who a month ago had been a titan of the aviation industry, looked at the calm, unyielding face of the young man he had so disastrously underestimated. He saw no room for negotiation. He saw only the end of his career. He was utterly and completely beaten. He chose option A. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Thorne, backed by the full institutional power of his father's empire, orchestrated a complete and systematic overhaul of transatlantic airways. He installed a new diverse and forward-thinking board of directors. He hired a new CEO, not from the insular world of legacy airlines, but a celebrated logistics and corporate culture expert named Sarah Jennings, known for her revolutionary work in turning around struggling companies. With the new leadership in place, Marcus implemented by force of will and weight of ownership every single demand from his original rejected counteroffer. CEO Sarah Jennings delivered a primetime public apology, not just to Marcus, but for the airline's documented systemic failures in training diversity and employee welfare. The independently designed state-of-the-art anti-bias and de-escalation training program became mandatory for every single employee from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. And the fund to compensate past victims of discrimination was formally established, endowed with an initial $10 million contribution from Thorne Dynamics itself, a clear message that this was a new era of accountability. But Marcus did one last thing, something no one, least of all the person it concerned, could have ever expected. He instructed the new head of human resources to reach out to Karen Miller. It was not with a lawsuit or a threat, but with an invitation. A week later, Karen, nervous and bewildered, found herself sitting in a private meeting room with the new CEO, Sarah Jennings. Jennings, a woman with a warm but no-nonsense demeanor, did not mince words. She first acknowledged the airline's profound and unforgivable role in the death of Karen's friend and the subsequent cynical cover-up. On behalf of the new transatlantic airways, she offered Karen a sincere, formal, and unconditional apology for that deep institutional failure. Then Jennings continued, leaning forward. She offered Karen a choice. You can accept a significant financial settlement for that past grievance, along with a lifetime gag order, and walk away. Start a new life. We wouldn't blame you, or you can accept a new role with us. Karen's heart pounded. A new role? After everything? The role isn't as a flight attendant, Jennings clarified. It's a paid consulting position. You would work directly with the independent firm we've hired to design and implement our new employee training programs. Your experience, Karen, it's uniquely valuable. You have seen the absolute worst of this system's failures from both sides. You were a victim of its negligence, and you became a perpetrator of its prejudices. You know where the rot is because you lived in it. We want you to be paid to help us ensure that what happened to your friend and what you did to Marcus Thorne can never, ever happen again. Karen Miller sat in that pristine corporate office, a place she thought she'd never enter again, except in nightmares. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she wept. These were not the hot tears of rage she'd cried in her car, nor the panicked tears of self-pity she'd shed to her husband. They were the tears of a profound, soul-shattering catharsis. She had been dragged to the absolute bottom, forced to confront the ugliest, most venomous parts of her own character. And there, standing in the smoldering wreckage of her life, she was being offered not a pardon, which she knew she didn't deserve, but something far more valuable, a chance at redemption. a chance to build something better from the ruins of her own making. Through her tears, she nodded. She accepted. The karma of that slap had indeed hit her with the force of a tidal wave, relentless and devastating. It had stripped her of her job, her pride, her marriage, and her illusions. But the final reckoning orchestrated by the very man she had wronged was not about destruction. It was about a forced, painful, and ultimately transformative rebirth. Marcus Thorne hadn't just shut the system down. He had bought it, taken it apart piece by piece, and was now painstakingly putting it back together stronger and more human than it had ever been before. It was the ultimate demonstration of power, not the raw, brutish power to crush, but the far greater, more profound power to remake. So what can we learn from this story? It's a brutal reminder that every action, no matter how small, can trigger an avalanche of consequences. For Karen Miller, a single prejudice-fueled decision set off a chain reaction that cost her everything she thought she knew. But it's also a story about the difference between revenge and justice. True power isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about having the strength and the vision to change the system that created them. Marcus Thorne could have simply destroyed the woman who wronged him, but instead he seized the opportunity to rebuild an entire corporation, and in a strange twist of fate, gave her a path to redeem herself. It's a complex, messy, and real-life example of how karma doesn't always just punish. Sometimes it forces a reckoning that leads to profound change. What do you think? Was this justice? Was the outcome fair to everyone involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about when the system gets a serious reality check, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe for more content just like this.